الدرس التاسع lesson 9 مذكرات قارئ reader's diary. مذكرة قارئ في كتاب diary of a reader in a book. paragraph 1. حين انتقلت للمرحلة المتوسطة انقطعت عن عادة الكتابة الأسبوعية تلك، إذ لم تكن حصة الإنشاء مقررة علينا في الجدول. So the author begins by saying that when I moved to middle school, I stopped the habit of weekly writing, as the writing period was not scheduled for us in the timetable. So before he had moved to middle school, he used to do a weekly writing as part of his timetable or the class schedule. But after that, he stopped that habit as he did not have that in the schedule. So here, حين means when, انتقلت لي means I moved to, المرحلة المتوسطة, middle school, انقطعت عن, I stopped, عادة, which is the habit of الكتابة الأسبوعية تلك, the weekly writing, إذ لم تكن, as there was not, حصة الإنشاء, that is the writing period, مقررة علينا, scheduled for us في الجدول, in the timetable. منذها بدأت الكتابة في البيت وبحرية أكبر. Since then, I began writing at home with more freedom. So although he had stopped this weekly writing, but he began to write freely, like free writing at home by himself. So منذها means since then, بدأت, I began, الكتابة, which is writing, في البيت, at home, وبحرية أكبر, with more freedom. وحين أطلعت أمي على بعض قصائدي بدت سعيدة بها. When I showed my mother some of my poems, she seemed happy with them. حين is when, أطلعت على, to show, I showed, أمي, my mother, بعض قصائدي, some of my poems, بدت سعيدة بها, she seemed happy with them. ففي ميدان تنافسها مع نساء أعمامي حول أيهن تملك طفلا أشد موهبة بدت كتاباتي الخرقاء كشيء قابل للاستخدام. So in the field of her competing with the wives of my uncles over which of them had the most talented child, my clumsy writing seemed like something usable. So this is generally like the ladies, sometimes they compete with other family members, other ladies, in terms of their children. They would like to boast about their own children and say, my child is talented in such and such and the like. So during that the gatherings that they have, she thought that this could be something that I can use. So here ففي ميدان means in the field of تنافسها is to compete. So or her competing مع نساء أعمامي, with the wives of my uncles. حول أيهن, over which of them تملك, had, طفلا أشد موهبة, the most talented child. Here the word موهبة means talent. بدت, seemed, كتاباتي الخرقاء, my clumsy writing. كتابات is my writing, or كتاباتي, and الخرقاء means clumsy. كشيء قابل للاستخدام, like something that is usable. وسرعان ما انتقلت تلك القصائد في العائلة من يد لأخرى. These poems were quickly passed in the family from one hand to another. So these poems that he had written, mother had shown to his aunt, his aunties, and they were just going looking at it from one of them, like one by one they were looking at these poems. سرعان ما means quickly, انتقلت is past, تلك القصائد, these poems, في العائلة, in the family, من يد لأخرى, from one hand to another. وحين أحيي أعمامي كان أحدهم يناديني بالشاعر. When I would greet my uncles, one of them would call me a poet. So this has become a news in the family, like everyone knows about the fact that he writes poem. So one of the uncles, when he would greet them, he would call him a poet. حين is when, أحيي, I would greet, أعمامي, my uncles, كان أحدهم, one of them would, يناديني بي, call me a شاعر, poet. والآخر يسأل هل هو مجيد? Another one would ask, is it good, like about the poem? It could be, this question could be either about him or could be about the poet. That is the poem good? So والآخر, and the other, يسأل, would ask, هل هو, is it مجيد, good. والثالث يأخذ بصوت مسموع في ترديد أبياتي غير الموزونة, and the third begins an audible voice to repeat my unrhyming verses. And another uncle, so one would ask if it's a good, other one would call him a poet, and another one would like he probably would have memorized some of them and would repeat these verses. and he calls it غير موزونة, يعني unrhyming verses. So الثالث is the third. يأخذ begins بصوت مسموع, in an audible voice. صوت is the voice and مسموع means that can be heard. في ترديده, he begins to repeat أبياتي غير موزونة, my unrhyming verses. وفجأة وجدت نفسي محطة اهتمام مربك, and suddenly I found myself to be the focus of a confusing attention. وتعليقات يصعب تمييز المشجع منها من الساخر, and comments that are difficult to distinguish between encouraging and sarcastic. وعلى إثر هذا انقطعت عن الكتابة سنين عدة, and as a result I stopped writing for several years. So the thing that happened, which is all of the family members knowing about him writing and them calling him a poet, as a result what happened was he was confused. Are they actually being serious, or are they being sarcastic? Are they making fun of him? So all these comments about calling him a poet and them repeating his rhyme, his poem, all of these comments made him get confused. Are they actually being serious, or are they being sarcastic? So as a result, what happened is he stopped writing for several years. وفجأة, and suddenly, وجدت نفسي, I found myself محطة, which is to be the focus of اهتمام مربك, a confusing attention. Murbik is to be confused, and the confusion is what these تعليقات, these comments, يصعب تمييز, it is difficult to distinguish al-mushajji', which is encouraging, yani these comments which seem like they are encouraging or that they are praising them, or as-sakhir, which is sarcastic. So is it encouraging or is it sarcastic? وعلى إثر هذا, and as a result of this, انقطعت عن, I stopped al-kitaba, writing, سنين عدة, for several years. And continuing the passage, the author says, لكنني طوال تلك الفترة واظبت على القراءة. But throughout that period, I continued to read. So although he stopped to write as a result of those comments, he still continued to read. So here لكنني is but I, طوال تلك الفترة, throughout that period, واظبت على means continue to قراءة, read. وهي عادة طورتها بفضل مجلدات التراث وكتيبات الدين في مكتبة بيتنا. It is a habit that I had developed thanks to the volumes of heritage and religious books in our home's library. So they had a home that had a huge amount of religious books. That was in the shelf. So when he was free, he would keep on reading them, and he developed the habit of reading. So وهي عادة, it is a habit, طورتها means I developed, بفضل, thanks to مجلدات, volumes of turath, heritage, and كتيبات الدين, religious books, في مكتبة بيتنا, in our home's library. لم نكن عائلة متدينة, we were not a religious family, لكنها كانت موضة دارجة أن تزين البيوت بهذا النوع من المكتبات. But it was a common style to decorate the houses with this type of library. So this was common among their neighborhood or their culture. Even if the people were not religious, they would decorate the house with religious books or classical Arabic books. So لم نكن means we were not. عائلة متدينة, عائلة is family, متدينة is religious. لكنها كانت, but it was, موضة دارجة, a common style, أن تزين البيوت, to decorate the houses, or the houses to be decorated, بهذا النوع من, with this type of مكتبات, libraries. وقد انكببت عليها لأننا لم نكن نملك كتبا غيرها. I devoted myself to them, يعني to these religious books, because we did not have other books. So since he was young and he had no other books to read, he kept reading these religious books. وقد انكببت عليها means to devote myself, and عليها is referring to the religious books. لأننا لم نكن نملك, because we did not have كتبا غيرها, other books. حتى إني تدينت لفترة من مراهقتي مستعينا بتأثيرها. I even became religious for a period of my adolescence using its influence. So he kept reading these books, and as a result he became religious. So حتى إنني تدينت, تدينا is to become religious, from the word religion, which is deen. لفترة من, for a period of مراهقتي, my adolescence. مستعينا be, using تأثيرها, its influence. إلا أن التدين في جوهره حين أفكر به الآن لم يكن يتجاوز نوعا من التمرد ضد أسرتي. However, my religiousness at its core, when I think about it now, was nothing more than a kind of rebellion against my family. So the religiousness that he had during his adolescence or these teenage years was nothing but a rebellion, like a stage in which he was rebellious towards his family. And he explains that further in the next sentence. So, however, is illa anna tadayyuni, my religiousness, fi jawharihi, at its core. What was it? حين أفكر بها الآن. When I think about it now. Now he's grown up and he's thinking about that time where he was religious. لم يكن يتجاوز. It was nothing more than نوع من التمرد, a kind of rebellion. So he was not really influenced to the point where he was really religious. However, it was a form of showing rebellion. ضد أسرتي, against my family. And what was that? فهو مجرد مخالفة لأسلوب حياتهم الخالي من الروحانية. It's merely an opposition to their lifestyle which is devoid of spirituality. So his family were not religious and they were not spiritual. So he wanted to be against them, or he wanted to be different to them, show that rebellion by being religious himself. So فهو مجرد مخالفة. It's merely an opposition لأسلوب حياتهم, to their lifestyle الخالي من, which is free of or devoid of الروحانية, and there is spirituality. أعتقد أني في النهاية فقد أصبت بالملل. I think I just eventually got bored. ولطالما كانت نزعاتي المتمردة قصيرة النفس على كل حال, and my rebellious tendencies have always been short-lived anyway. So like this phase that he was going through, which was the phase of being religious, to show his rebellion against his family, that was very short-lived. It didn't last that long. So because as he says that he eventually got bored. أصبت بالملل. So أعتقد means I think, أني فقط, I just, في النهاية, eventually, أصبت بالملل, got bored. ولطالما كانت, have always been, نزعاتي المتمردة, يعني my rebellious tendencies, قصيرة النفس, يعني short-lived, على كل حال, anyway. كان انصرافي عن الدين يترافق مع زيادة اهتمامي بالفكر الغربي حين بلغت المرحلة الثانوية. My departure from religion was accompanied by an increase in my interest in Western ideas when I reached secondary school. أي حين بدأت أحوز الاستقلالية الكافية لاقتناء الكتب. And that is when I began to have sufficient independence to purchase books. So when he reached secondary school, what happened was that he grew out of the phase of reading religious books, and that was the time when he grew out of that adolescence phase when he had enough money to purchase books. He moved towards Western ideas. So the religious phase ended and the Western ideas began, and this was when he was in secondary school. So كان was انصرافي, my departure, عن الدين, from religion, يترافق مع, accompanied by, زيادة اهتمامي ب, an increase in my interest in الفكر الغربي, Western ideas. So he was very much interested in the Western ideas, and that was حين بلغت, as he says, when I reached المرحلة الثانوية, secondary school, أي, that is حين بدأت, when I began أحوز, to have, or أحوز, to have الاستقلالية الكافية, sufficient independence, لاقتناء, to purchase الكتب, books. ورغم تخبطي بين المواضيع والكتاب وعجزي عن فهم ما يقولونه في كثير من الأحيان, فقد واظبت على تلك القراءات حينا من الدهر من دون أن أنجح في العثور على ما ينفذ إلى نفسي. It says, despite my confusion between topics and writers and my inability to understand what they were saying most times, I continued with these readings for some time without succeeding in finding something that would break through or penetrate my soul. Like he continued to read this, although he was unable to understand what these authors were saying, and he did not find anything that can break through his soul, that can actually influence him. So رغم is despite, تخبطي, which is my confusion, بين المواضيع, between the topics, الكتاب, writers, عجزي عن فهم, my inability to understand, ما يقولونه, what they were saying, في كثير من الأحيان, most times, فقد واظبت على, I continued with تلك القراءات, those readings, حين من الدهر, يعني for some time, من دون أن أنجح, without succeeding, في العثور على, in finding something, ما ينفذ, that could penetrate or break through, نفسي, my soul. تعد هذه رواية مثالا مناسبا جدا على مذكرات قارئ. This journal is considered to be a very appropriate example of a reader's diary. So all of these things that we mentioned is a good example of a reader's diary. Like he has written about his journey, how he began writing and then he stopped writing and then he moved to reading, and how he began to read and what he ended up with. So here تعد means considered to be هذه رواية, this journal, مثالا مناسبا, an appropriate example, جدا يعني very, مذكرات قارئ, a reader's diary. And this reader's diary is the whole topic of this lesson. لأن الشخصية الرئيسة فيها هي شخصية قارئ بالدرجة الأولى, because the main character in it is the character of the reader in the first place. Like you actually live through this reader's feelings and his experience, and he's the main character. So لأن, because الشخصية الرئيسة, the main character فيها in it, هي الشخصية is the character of قارئ, the reader بالدرجة الأولى, in the first place. And this is different to if you read a story or another form of writing, in that it will be like in a third person and you would have a general idea of what's happening in the story. Whereas in this case, when it's a reader's diary, you are seeing from the perspective of the one who wrote the book or the diary. ويسجل من خلالها مذكراته أسبوعيا ويتوقف في كل أسبوع عند أهم المحطات عندما يستدعي التوثيق فقط. So he says he writes his diary on a weekly basis, stopping every week at the most important stopping places, at that which requires documentation alone. So on a weekly basis he will go through all the important things that he's gone through, and then only the ones that are so important to be written down he will write them. So يسجل, he writes من خلالها, through it, مذكراته, his diary, أسبوعيا, on a weekly basis. يتوقف, he stops, في كل أسبوع, every week, عند أهم, at the most important محطات, stopping places. عندما, at that which يستدعي, requires التوثيق, documentation فقط, alone. ولا يذكر التفاصيل جميعها, يعني he would not mention all the details. حتى إن أسابيعه غير مؤرخة, such that even if its dates, weeks are not dated, هي مرقة بالتسلسل فقط, they are only numbered sequentially. So he doesn't mention every single thing in detail, and he does not write the dates of everything, but it will be in the correct sequence. لا يذكر, he doesn't mention التفاصيل جميعها, all the details. حتى إن أسابيعه, such that even its weeks غير مؤرخة, they are not dated. هي مرقمة فقط, they're only numbered بالتسلسل, sequentially. So this what we just read now is an example of a reader's diary, and it began with the one who wrote the diary, him talking about his experience as a writer, and then him moving on to reading and how he began reading and how he ended up with.